It's about that time of the week to open up the Peacock and Williamson mailbag. We are talking New York Jets hot seats, expectations for the Jets going into 2024. Same for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and so much more. Team versus leverage. Great questions. And then we will hit all of them on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love and appreciate all of our everydayers out there. And I know a lot of you still don't hit that subscribe button. So make sure you are subscribed up so you know when a new pod hits on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Today's episode of P&W is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down, sports stop sporting like we want them to, and Olympics wind down as well. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Matt. We're going to make no mention of a certain player and a certain trade involving two teams that we cover on this episode of Peacock and Williamson by request from some folks. And there's plenty of to talk to about that, which we have this week and will continue. But we're going to focus on a few other teams around the league. We are going to talk about player and team leverage, which I think is super fascinating. I want to start with the Jets, though. And we have a question here from, let me get the name right. This question is from Michael. He says, should Joe Douglas's seat be just as hot as Robert Saleh's going into 2024 with draft picks like Becton, Moore, Wilson, maybe Rodgers, now Reddick, and the holdout going on there, and Hassan Reddick has, requested a trade, and they traded for a guy who they knew needed a new contract and can't get that done. I just look back at all the quarterback stuff in recent years. The drafting of Wilson obviously is a big one with Zach Wilson, but not having other plans aside from Wilson to go help your team that's pretty well built in some other areas, and letting that part of your team down and your fan base down, and not being able to go do what you need to do and go in enough football games. So Robert Saleh is the one that takes the heat. Should that heat really be on Joe Douglas, the GM, is the question.
Yeah, first off, this will be my last podcast from my dorm room here with it bouncing off the walls, and Steeler camp is about to be resolved. But then as soon as I get home, I'm going to Steeler Bills joint practice. So I'm kind of excited about that. That's going to be an interesting little something different,
Love the joint practices. It's the hinge point, not to get off topic real quick here. The hinge point of the preseason is joint practice week. I think it's where jobs are won and lost. And teams put their plan together for their final two preseason games, and they know what their depth chart looks like going into the season.
Yep, and I think it's, make some moves happen. It's just a whole different look of your team. You do a lot of situational stuff, a lot of special team stuff. I know we have a special teams question. But back to the Jets, they've invested a lot over the last couple of years, and you can explain last year away. And in some ways, I think the whole staff, and particularly Robert Saleh, did a pretty good job to get to 7-10, considering losing your quarterback 4 plays in. But facts are facts. He took over a 2-win team from Adam Gase that was dismal, but only got him to 4 wins in next season and 7 in each of the last 2 years. So he's at 18 over 3 years. That's not wonderful. But the question is more about the GM. And I think that's warranted. That draft class where you end up with the offensive and defensive rookie of the year, even though they were both high picks, is pretty nicely done. And I do think both these gentlemen and the organization as a whole and the quarterback are pushing their chips in the middle this year. And if this year goes badly, we always talk about them being the most fragile roster in the league. The O-line is kind of old at tackle, but they drafted one. The quarterback is obviously old. Can you keep the defense close to where it's been? overall, I think there's a little dysfunction in this room, and the Reddick stuff's a little bit weird. Obviously, that's not a glowing endorsement for anyone involved, particularly Douglas. But all in all, considering it had to get condoned by the owner, I think being aggressive as they did, they at least have some youth to fall back on if that crumbles.
I tend to think there's too much heat on both Saleh and Douglas. I think they
Yeah,
both have done a pretty good job overall. I think they would both get jobs. For Saleh, he would instantly get a DC job, I'm sure, in the NFL. I don't know if you'd get an instant head coach job. I think Joe Douglas would get an opportunity somewhere. But there's been like that, just the one big missing piece. And they're kind of it's almost like a poker hand that they've built. But they need that card on the river, right? You need that last card, and it's the quarterback card, and all of a sudden you have the best hand at the table. But all your chips are in. And if you don't get that card, if Aaron Rodgers isn't that guy for you this year, then guess what? You busted because someone else called you bluff and beats you at the poker table. So if we're using the poker analogy, they could be hoisting a Lombardi. They could be both out of jobs because I think they've kind of gone all in, and they've built a really good hand as long as they get that card.
Yeah, and just looking at things, I wanted to double check their draft history because I forgot that Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson year, they ended up with Jermaine Johnson. I mean, they got these extra picks in the Jamal Adams trade. That was a heck of a move.
Was Breece Hall the same
year?
Breece
Hall was in that. Yeah, Breece Hall was the 36th
4 out of the
pick.
top 35 picks or whatever it was.
Yeah, and the Zach Wilson pick looks terrible, but they also got Elijah Tucker in that draft, and they need some health things to go their way. I don't know what Will McDonald will become. All of a sudden, it's a pivotal year for him. But all in all, I don't think they've drafted poorly.
They've built a monster. If Aaron Rodgers is Hall of Fame Aaron Rodgers, they're scary. Mm-hmm. They're the best team in the NFL.
Tend to agree. I mean, I think they're one of the few teams that I could write a story that they won the Super Bowl or picked in the top 10. I think they could be one of the two.
I mean, they could be all over the place. Since we brought up the Hassan Reddick stuff, and I know we talked about it yesterday, but not necessarily, we can talk about this not with specifics of really one player in mind, because we see it all the time around the NFL. And I think one of the biggest ways the current NFL is different from the old NFL, Matt, is how willing teams are to play hardball with their players. And we got a question here from Naz. He says, no, I'm sorry. Naz is a different question upcoming. This one's from Joey Bag of Donuts, who's a frequent commenter to the show. He says, if a player is under contract, by the way. Yeah. We appreciate all the regulars, all the everydayers out there that come strong with the questions every single week. If a player is under contract and requests a trade, why doesn't the team just tell him no? Play under contract.
I wish I had a better answer for this, because back in the day, Al Davis would just say, get out of my office. I don't want to hear about it until your contract's up unless I get in touch with you. You know what I mean?
And which player has sat out to their own benefit?
Yeah. I mean, Lev Bell's the only one I can remember that actually sat out a whole season, and
his
that
career
didn't help
ended.
him one bit. Or, hey, I sat out 2 games, and there's 2 game checks that are millions of dollars. I'm sure much of it just ends up with, frankly, the world's a little softer than it was in the Al Davis years, and we're going to coddle our athletes more, and they're worth more, and they have more say in social networking and in the media, and people listen to them more.
Yeah, it's the PR hit, right?
I guess, but I mean, in the end, I'm a little old. I mean, I think a contract should be a contract, and if both sides want to address it and tear it up, fine. But I kind of think you signed it. Your union signed the collective bargaining agreement. I mean, the rookie stuff is out of our hands, and after that, why do you really have power in this? I mean, kind of looked like the Bengals with Higgins. They didn't listen to any of his demands and just said, "You're playing."
Yeah. So with certain players and the timing of it, I totally understand. And because a team can cut you at any time as well, unless a contract is guaranteed. And that's why players want so many guarantees in their contracts. And so when a player has the power and they want to swing that leverage and get the most they can, I totally get it. And players should try to get whatever they can. But I also get it when the team has the leverage as well. And the teams don't use that leverage as much as they used to. And players, before they're a free agent, try to become a free agent essentially and try to get their new deal before it's time. And teams are willing to work with them so much more than they ever have before.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised that it doesn't happen more often where a team's like, man, we just can't get this done and you're under contract. So we're gonna have to revisit this next offseason. And teams just almost don't do it, even though there's never really been a player that we've seen under contract win that battle if the team says no. And yet the teams still in this day and age aren't willing to say no as much as they used to, or really are hardly ever.
So I said this kind of earlier that all these players in all sports are now more public figures. They have more power, more say. They have more of an audience than they ever did. And that's all wonderful and good for them, and they've earned it. There's no question about it. But then I saw yesterday the Dallas Cowboys are worth $10 billion now. Like, okay, I mean, you're making these guys are making $50 million a year. They're our starting quarterback. Yeah, but we're worth $10 billion. You know, like it's we don't care one bit. I don't have to listen to you at all.
But it's also it shows how strong the NFL is and how good business is. And to be honest with you, the salary cap should probably not necessarily go away, but it should be so big at this point that you should be able to keep all the players you need to.
Mm-hmm.
And pay them what they are
in that direction. If it wasn't for COVID, I think it'd probably be to that point almost.
It might be closer to that. Yeah. And it's
yeah.
gone up a ton since COVID. So maybe that's the world we're living in, and teams realizing, man, we've got a deal on our players versus what NBA and Major League Baseball are playing their guys.
I mean, the ratio of where the money goes, owners to players, is still very one-sided.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And for GMs, I'm sure they would love to be able to pay everybody. And so maybe that's the world we're heading to. And so GMs just see it. They're like, yeah, you know what? You're one of the best players in your position. Here's more money because you deserve it.
Yeah, I was at the Steeler preseason game and parking was $70. I mean, Russell Wilson's not getting any of that dollars, you know. I mean, let alone in LA and right. You know, like they're making every beer and every hot dog sold and every jersey. I mean, not to mention
that $12 beer. It's like which one of these dollars is going to the players?
None.
All right. Next, let's talk Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What to expect there? It's a team we haven't talked a lot about, and not a lot has been written about that team in 2024. And how about the new kickoff rules? Could we see it come and gone? Do we even feel like this is a rule that is going to benefit anybody in the NFL? We'll get that and more next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And I love sports. You love sports. Matt loves sports. We all love sports. It's why we're here talking about sports. But as playoffs wind down, Olympics wind down, you pretty much got Major League Baseball every day as we wait for the NFL season. And sports aren't quite sporting like we might want them to currently. FanDuel lets us keep going. And whenever you want, all you have to do is open up the app, dream up a bet anytime you are in the mood, because there is so many ways to bet on the 2024 NFL season, even though the regular season has not yet begun. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com, start making the most out of your summer. Baseball, football, whatever it is, you can find it at FanDuel. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right. How about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? And thanks to, I believe it was Naz. Yeah, this was Naz, the question here about the Bucs. And it's a team that we don't talk about a lot. The Buccaneers, the Carolina Panthers, without Dave Canales as the OC in Tampa. Who do you think Baker has? Do you think Baker has just as good of a season as he did last year with Canales? Or do you expect Tampa to take a step back as a whole this year? And Dave Canales going from offensive coordinator in Tampa to head coach of the Carolina Panthers. I know what our expectations are for the Panthers, which is not a lot. Mm-hmm. We don't expect Dave Canales to make a big difference. And if he doesn't make a big difference in Carolina, does that doesn't mean it doesn't make a big difference losing him in Tampa, Matt?
Yeah, it's funny. We have not talked a lot of Buccaneers. And I'm a Todd Bowles fan. He was the assistant defensive back coach when I was with the Browns. And I could tell, everyone in the world could tell he was a real up-and-comer. But to be very honest, I think he's more of a coordinator than he is head coach, although I think he's become a better head coach over the last couple of years. Canales probably has something to do with that, of course. So this is a pivotal year for Bowles. But I'm kind of, we're just talking about ownership and value of teams. If I was Bucs ownership, what is an acceptable season? And in that division, I hesitate to say playoffs or bust, but it shouldn't be that far off. Or can't you be a top 7 team in the NFC? I mean, I don't think that's all that much to ask, considering where this roster's at. I mean, they have a quality roster. I think it's an average team, but I would say the same about the Saints. I would say the same about the Falcons, that they're somewhere in the average tier. And we just paid a quarterback. We just paid Evans. Guys like Kansas. We just paid Wirfs. We got guys like Kansas and some young dudes we expect to improve. But for Baker, I lean towards last year will be better for him than this year. I thought Canales really did a good job with him and does an excellent job with shorter quarterbacks. Geno Smith, Baker. Now he's trying to deal with Bryce Young, which is a different challenge than just reeling Baker in. So could they win the division again? Absolutely, and I might even pick them. But I probably, if the over-under for Baker's 2024 season is what he did in 2023, I'll probably take the under.
This is suddenly a team that is more talented on offense than defense in Tampa.
Yeah,
I think, they've got a couple of first rounders. I know I've talked about this before. It's pretty much the only thing I've said about Tampa this offseason is that I love how cartoonish their defensive tackles are, basically. With
it's pretty funny, yeah.
Yeah, with Vita Vea, the biggest nose tackle in the NFL, and then next to him is Kalijah Kancey, who's like the smallest interior defensive lineman in the NFL, especially now that Aaron Donald is gone.
Yeah.
So
they both might be good.
Yeah, I like both. I think it's a good year. The reason we talked about Kancey is because he was one of my breakout candidates for this season. Mm-hmm. Levante David still in the back end. You need to find that outside pass rush. If they can find that, that'll be huge for them. The secondary looks a lot different than it did a couple of years ago. You still have Antoine Winfield in the middle there, but Zion McCollum, who's freakish athlete. Can he take a big step up this year? You got Jamel Dean on the other side, Jordan Whitehead. Not a lot of depth in the secondary. I do have some questions there, but they've got offensive linemen. They drafted Graham Barton to be the center of the future there, to go with Wirfs, who looked just as good at left tackle, if not better than he did at right tackle. Recently got paid. He got Godeke over there, Cody Mock as well. So I like the line. You got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I mean, you've got pros there on the outside. I generally don't care who your running back is if your offensive line is good. So, it's still all there for Baker Mayfield. And maybe it was just a stable environment that he came into. Now, does some of that stability start to fall off because you have a new offensive coordinator there? I don't know. Liam Cohn is a name that, is sort of an up-and-comer himself, like Todd Bowles once was. And he's well thought of in a lot of circles. I don't know what to expect about Liam Cohn here as OC, but you have to expect some drop off there, or at least some. And for Baker Mayfield,
he's a bit of an unknown coordinator,
right? And for Baker Mayfield, it's like the consistency is the one thing he's always lacked. So changing teams, changing coordinators, and I can't think it bodes well necessarily for Baker Mayfield. And did we see his ceiling last year? I guess is my big question.
Yeah, and you mentioned, and I forgot to, that they also paid Winfield. So this owner, I mean, clearly the plan this offseason was, let's keep our own. We're going the right direction. Evans, Wirfs, Baker, Winfield. I mean, Wirfs and Winfield are the highest paid players of any offensive lineman or defensive back in history. I mean, like, these aren't small deals. So if I'm the owner, I'm like, well, I have to see a step forward this year, or why did we sign all the same guys back?
Yeah, and really where they draft is probably what tells you what Baker's future is there. Because if they're drafting in the top 10 or 15, they're going to use that on a quarterback, because they did nothing at quarterback. They got Kyle Trask, who nobody has ever said anything good about since he's been drafted in the second round by the Tampa Bay Bucks, and then John Wolford, who I wouldn't know if I had passed him on the street. And they didn't do anything at quarterback. So this is Baker Mayfield's squad this year. And if they're a playoff team and they're drafted in the 20s, then I think that's our answer. And so I really don't know how to answer the question, because I have no idea. I have no idea what to expect. But I do think that if they're drafting in the top half of the draft, then they're drafting a quarterback, or that they're going to be a huge team in the market for a quarterback this year. And if they're drafted in the 20s, that probably tells me that they didn't miss Canales and everything's gravy, and they're building under Baker Mayfield to try to continue to win there. And it's a winnable division, but it's also a little bit of fool's gold too. It's like, cool, we won the division going 500. It's like, well, you're still a 500 team, and where are you really going is kind of where they've been. But that's a division you can do that in. Some of the other divisions, every other division in the NFL, you can't just be mediocre every year and be like, cool, we made the playoffs.
Right. But I mean, if they were the AFC North or many other divisions, we would not be talking about them as potential.
And what they did last year might not look as good.
Right.
Agreed. They were just in another division, same team, same everything. Last few years, it's helped them to look better than they are, maybe. So maybe there's some false sense of where they are as a franchise right now.
And as you were talking about, they could be a round one team for quarterback for sure. I was sitting there thinking, like, it wouldn't have been that hard to have a Hendon Hooker or a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields or Sam Darnold, and someone that's got pedigree. That Darnold's a little more expensive than those guys, but a third-round pick or that has a chance a year from now, or a reclamation project. There's no one waiting in the wings that you could go to and say, well, at least we can see what this guy's got.
Next, I want to talk offensive line coaches, where the value lies in the NFL, and the new kickoff rules. Is it something we could see one and done in the NFL? Next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day at the gym, right? But what about therapy day? That's something you shouldn't be skipping either. And when your schedule's packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and so much more, there's a little computer in everybody's pockets right now, bugging them all day long, keeping them away from some of their priorities that they might start the day with. Even when you know what makes you happy, sometimes it's hard to make time for it. So when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. All you do is you fill out a brief questionnaire, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We've seen 1 week of preseason football. We've actually talked about this quite a bit with the new kickoff rule. And I don't know what to think about it, Matt. I think I don't want to speak for you, but I think you're kind of like, I have no idea. I don't know what to think about it. Maybe in the regular season, we'll see how teams utilize this thing a little more. And maybe teams are still trying to figure it out or not trying to show anything. And by the way, when you're watching those joint practices, let us know how that looks. And if they're trying anything you haven't seen yet from the Steelers and Bills with those new kickoff rules. But Dave says, do you think there's a chance the new kickoff rules could be scrapped after 1 year and go back to how they were because nothing ends up changing or teams just don't like it?
I think that's definitely a possibility. And I do think it's way too early to jump the gun off this is a good experiment, a bad experiment, a good rule change or not. And you mentioned, I'm going to go to a joint practice, and I have kind of gotten word special teams will be prioritized here, which means kickoffs are going to be prioritized in a big way. And I would hope in that environment that you see some different things, because all these preseason stuff I've seen, everyone just runs straight ahead. Like nobody does anything creative with it. And I know special teams coaches have been drawing things up on napkins to try, and but you don't want to be the first one to try something crazy and ends up, costing you a touchdown or something like that too. But I like how you explained it the other day. I think that was Monday, where that 5 yard distance might be too short. That maybe that's the crux of the problem here. So,
but that's the whole thing they're trying to get rid of is that space that creates the big collisions. To be honest with you, I wonder if it's almost you let them get closer, or you let them do something earlier. It's just, the timing of it is just weird. It's just chaotic and super awkward. And maybe that's just because it's new to everybody. And as of now, I'm like, why did they do this? It's not something I like. And it's just going to start giving teams an extra 5 yards because Kyle Shanahan locally was asked about it. He's like, could you just start kicking in the end zone and say, go ahead, start at the 30, because the average return was 29. And why would you the thing that I think could potentially happen that really freaks a team out is their kicker gets hurt, and they need their kickers to kick field goals.
Yeah.
So it's like all
And
of a
they're
sudden
going to have to
kicker
make a
has
tackle probably.
Yeah,
Right.
and all of a sudden now they can't kick field goals because their kicker got hurt, and they're not doing anything. They're not helping themselves by not allowing teams to return it because they're just getting back to the 29-yard line anyway. And then you take away the aspect of them hitting a long run on you.
I mean, the 5-yard thing aside that we did talk through, I've said it all along that starting at the 30 isn't a steep enough penalty. At least make it to 35. I mean, like
And
then
that
I
was
would consider it. Yeah.
that was the original plan, and teams
Oh,
came back
okay.
and said, "No, let's make it 30 instead of the 35." That was like they agreed to it, and then they altered that one thing, which is interesting.
That is definitely interesting because I've said all along that I think there'll be a team or two a month into this that allows a couple big returns, just says, we're not doing that anymore. Just kick it out of the end zone. But it's also been brought up around here. I mean, this area of the country, it's not always, you can't always do it. I think it was the Steelers special teams coach that they interviewed way back when about the rule. And like, would you consider just blasting it out of the end zone? He's like, well, we played in Buffalo in the AFC wildcard game. We couldn't kick it to the end zone. Like it's not as easy with weather as you always think.
That's true.
So
That's
you can't totally ignore it. You're going to have to do it at some point, even if you don't like landing it in the landing zone.
James asks, is you guys have talked about how there aren't enough starting level offensive linemen in the NFL, but how much of that is a lack of potentially quality O-line coaches? Is the league doing a bad job of developing offensive linemen?
Horrible. But I think it's not bad O-line coaches. I think it's not enough practice time, period, because of the CBA. I mean, I think that position is very unnatural. It's way more mental and technique than people realize just because they're the biggest people on the field. It doesn't, how many guys have come in the league that were drafted high since Tony Manrich that were just big and strong, but couldn't, move bodies because they have no technique. And I also think continuity and playing together on the line is incredibly important, and you just don't get nearly enough of that in practices nowadays. And plus of the practices, like even like OTA practices, do O-linemen really get much better? I mean, they don't do anything physical. I mean, I guess they work on their footwork and stuff, but
yeah, they're working on getting to their marks, their landing spots where they're supposed to be potentially. And then, but the leverage of it, the physicality of it. And I think tackling is another one. Absolutely. Because teams don't practice tackling hardly ever. Right. And then all of a sudden you get in a preseason game, you see guys missing tackles left and right because they don't practice it ever because they never go full speed.
And that's the problem. I mean, again, I think there's not enough practice time. There's not enough developmental time. I've said this for decades now. I would love there to be a minor league where you just develop guys and call them up on, your goalie gets hurt, you call up the goalie from the minors in hockey, like that type of thing. I know it's not easier said than done, but I will say most people have not had the luxury of being fortunate enough to be in a college or NFL offensive line meeting. But those O-line coaches will say something like, if your second step was just 2 inches shorter, 2 inches, you would have so much more power. Like you're getting a little ahead of your skis. I mean, like that seems like nothing for a 6'6", 355-pound man. But like your size 18 feet, if you could make them 1.5 inches shorter, you would be a much better blocker. Like I'll try, but I mean, that's not easy to do.
I think the O-line coaches are phenomenal too. So I think it's partially what the college game is giving the NFL game too.
Yeah. And I do think it's interesting because this past year we saw a ton of offensive linemen in the first round. Maybe we're going to, maybe there's just down times. Maybe they're trending up a little bit more.
It's a renaissance. It's going to be like the new wide receiver position where all of a sudden every team's got too many offensive linemen everywhere.
We're a long way from that. Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
But it's worth lift an eyebrow and say, are we getting better ones into the league now? Maybe.
I want to finish here. Naz has another question here about the Cardinals. The Cardinals roster is far from perfect, but people are quickly forgetting what a healthy Kyler Murray can do. Cardinals win total is set at 7.5. Would you take the over or the under there?
I think he has great points. I think that coaching staff on both sides of the ball more than passed their first test as rookies. And Kyler, at this point, even last year, was he even going to play this year? That's where we were leading into the preseason. You add Harrison. I just think the defense is so devoid of talent, though. I mean, they had to do all sorts of unorthodox stuff just to kind of cause confusion because they can't win one-on-one battles on defense. I mean, I'd probably still lean under. It's a pretty big number.
I'd probably go under there, but I might be more. I might be more likely to have Kyler Murray on my fantasy team because of the same reasons
I
than
have him
thinking
really
that,
high on my quarterback.
yeah,
ranks.
than thinking that the Cardinals are going big places this year. Still maybe 1 year away. There's still some work to do, but I do like the direction they're going. And sometimes when teams arrive, they arrive so quickly. Maybe that's this year. Maybe we're underselling them, but right now I'd probably still go under. Too many holes on the team overall, and still you need Marvin Harrison Jr. to develop. You're expecting him to hit the ground running, be a true number one from day one, and he might be that, but they still need a lot else. But I do like where the offensive line is. Much more bullish on the offense with Kyler Murray healthy than the defense right now over there.
Like if, for example, this question was phrased as, okay, I'm going to put the Cardinals offense as the 15th best, over or under. I would say better.
I can see that.
You know what I mean?
Things still have to go right, but absolutely I can see that.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for all of the questions. Apologies to the questions we didn't get to. You can always get those questions in every week to us at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL, or drop a question in the YouTube comments. Make sure you subscribe while you are there on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. For your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy. Get ready for your fantasy leagues. Locked On Dynasty Football featuring Matthew Williamson once a week there on the Locked On Dynasty pod as well. Get ready for those fantasy leagues. Maybe draft Kyler Murray while you're there. And Matt and I will be back tomorrow right here. Peacock and Williamson.